My son-in-law's family had never hidden their disdain for me. To them, I was nothing more than a widow in her 60s, a retired nurse who had no place in their glittering world of country clubs and polished reputations. That night, they proved just how deep their contempt ran. I walked into the Grand Oakland Hotel, late, my dress wrinkled, my hands still bearing faint smudges from what I'd been doing just an hour earlier. I hadn't meant to arrive that way. On the highway, I had stopped to help a man stranded beside a broken Rolls-Royce. It had taken me nearly 2 hours, and though I tried to clean up, traces of grease clung to me like a scarlet letter. The moment I entered, every perfectly dressed head turned. My daughter's in-laws, Victor, Lorraine, and their son Martin, looked at me with horror thinly veiled behind tight smiles. Then Lorraine's voice sliced through the room. "If you can't even dress like a civilized woman," she sneered loudly enough for every guest to hear, "then don't sit at the table with civilized people." Gasps. Silence. My daughter's face went pale, and in that moment I realized they hadn't just humiliated me. They had declared war. Life never handed me anything easily. I was born in a small Ohio town, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. My parents worked themselves to exhaustion just to keep food on the table. From a young age, I understood that if I wanted a better future, I'd have to claw my way toward it. That was why I became a nurse. It wasn't glamorous. Long shifts, aching feet, nights that bled into mornings. But it was honest. It mattered. People trusted me with their weakest moments, and I learned that dignity is often just having someone by your side when the world feels unbearable. Over the years, I delivered babies, comforted the dying, and patched up lives torn apart by accidents. It wasn't wealth, but it was purpose. Then came David. He wasn't the kind of man to sweep anyone off their feet with grand gestures. His love was steady, quiet, the kind that seeped into your bones and stayed there. He worked as a mechanic, fixing cars with the same patience he used to fix my doubts. Together, we built a modest life. Bills paid, a small house with a garden out back. Laughter that filled our evenings. When our daughter Saxon was born, the world changed. Suddenly, every shift at the hospital wasn't just about duty. It was about her future. David and I sacrificed for her without hesitation. Shoes before vacations. Books before new furniture. Tuition before anything else. We didn't have much, but we had enough, and most importantly, we had each other. And then, the accident. David loved the mountains. Hiking was his sanctuary, the way he cleared his head. One weekend, he went with friends on a trip in the Rockies. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous. He'd done harder climbs before. But sometimes fate doesn't need danger. Just one loose rock, one wrong step. He fell nearly 30 feet. He survived, but not in the way that mattered. The doctors spoke in cold medical terms. Severe traumatic brain injury. Persistent vegetative state. Words that shattered my life. My husband was alive, but gone. His body breathed, but his eyes never recognized me again. For 3 years, I lived in a kind of prison. I stopped being a wife and became a caretaker. I fed him through tubes, turned him in bed to prevent sores, brushed his hair, held his hand. I whispered stories about our life, our first date, Saxon's first steps, the way the garden used to bloom in spring, praying something inside him could still hear me. Some nights, I thought I saw his fingers twitch or his lips move, but hope can be cruel. Nothing ever came back. The hardest part wasn't the work. I was a nurse. I knew how to care for a body. The hardest part was watching a man who once laughed, teased, dreamed with me, reduced to silence. Watching Saxon, still young, struggle to understand why her father no longer spoke to her. Watching our savings drain away into medical bills, until nothing was left but the house and my small paycheck. And then, one winter morning, his body finally gave up. After 3 years of waiting, I buried my husband. I thought the worst was behind me, but grief is a cunning thief. It creeps back in quiet moments, the empty chair at dinner, the sound of a song he used to hum, the ache of waking up alone. And I knew I had to carry on, for Saxon. I poured everything I had into her. She was my anchor, the one bright thread in a life that had unraveled. When she fell in love with Martin Eden Jr., I told myself I'd be happy for her, no matter what. But Martin's family was nothing like ours. His parents, Ruth Morse and Colonel Brissenden, looked at me as if I were invisible, or worse, inconvenient. To them, I was just a widow, a retired nurse who didn't belong in their glossy world of chandeliers and country clubs. I endured it. I told myself it didn't matter if Ruth corrected my manners at the table, or if Brissenden ignored me outright. I paid for half the wedding from what little David's life insurance had left. I gave them my blessing when they bought their first house, even contributed money I could barely spare. But every gathering chipped at me. Every polite smile, every thinly veiled insult reminded me that in their eyes, I would never be worthy. And the cruelest part? My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was trapped between love for her husband and loyalty to me. I told myself I could survive it. After all, hadn't I already survived worse? Poverty, widowhood, 3 years of limbo beside a man who no longer spoke. I believed I could endure anything, but endurance has its limits, and I didn't know it then. But the night of Lorraine's birthday party would be the moment everything changed. People often mistake survival for weakness. They look at someone like me, a widow in her 60s, retired from nursing, and think I'm simply existing, drifting quietly into the margins of life. They couldn't be more wrong. I survived poverty, widowhood, and the slow cruelty of watching my husband linger between life and death. I carried the weight of raising a daughter alone, of working double shifts to keep her dreams alive. And I came out the other side, not broken, but sharpened. My life is simple now, but it is mine. I live in a modest house on the edge of Oakland, nothing fancy, but every corner carries the warmth of David's memory. The roses in the garden bloom because I still tend them, the same way we used to together. Inside, my kitchen smells of fresh bread on Sundays, and the old armchair by the window has become my evening refuge. I don't have wealth, but I do have independence. My pension, carefully saved, keeps me afloat. I volunteer at the local clinic twice a week, helping young nurses find their footing. They call me Miss Jane, half with respect, half with affection, and it gives me a quiet pride. And most importantly, I still have Saxon. Despite the coldness of her in-laws, she calls me almost every evening. Sometimes just to share what she cooked. Sometimes to talk about the weather. Small conversations, but to me, they're lifelines. I know she feels trapped, torn between loyalty to me and the gilded prison of her husband's family. But she hasn't abandoned me. That matters more than they'll ever understand. Of course, the Whitfields, Ruth, and Colonel Brissenden pretend I don't exist. At their gatherings, they introduce me politely, but with a distance, as if ashamed to admit their daughter-in-law has a mother who once worked 12-hour shifts in scrubs. To them, dignity means marble floors, brand-name clothes, and investment portfolios. To me, it means showing up when someone is sick, tired, or lost. Still, I hold my head high. I've learned that self-respect doesn't come from the approval of others. It comes from knowing what you've endured, what you've given, and what you've chosen to stand for. That's why, when the invitation came for Lorraine's birthday celebration at the Grand Oakland Hotel, I didn't hesitate. Yes, the call had been reluctant, almost forced. Martin's voice carried no warmth when he relayed it. Mother insists you come, as though he were delivering orders, not an invitation. But I knew Saxon wanted me there, and if my daughter needed me, I would go, no matter how much contempt awaited me in that glittering room. I prepared carefully. I ironed my best navy dress, polished my shoes, and even spent a little extra from my savings on a gift, a silk scarf imported from Italy. Nothing extravagant, but elegant. Something that said, I thought of you, even if I knew Lorraine would see it as beneath her standards. As I stood in front of the mirror before leaving, I studied the woman staring back at me. Short silver hair neatly brushed, a lean figure still straight despite age, eyes that had seen too much but refused to dim. I wasn't glamorous, but I wasn't defeated either. I whispered to the reflection, the way I sometimes did to David's memory. We gave her everything, and now I'll show them what strength really looks like. That night, I walked out of my little house carrying not just a gift bag, but decades of survival. I didn't know what awaited me at the Grand Oakland Hotel, but I knew one thing for certain. They had underestimated me. The Grand Oakland Hotel glowed like a monument to wealth that evening. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across the marble foyer. Violins played from the mezzanine, and the air itself seemed perfumed with arrogance. I paused outside the glass doors, adjusting the scarf around my shoulders. My modest Toyota looked almost ashamed among the sleek line of BMWs, Jaguars, and polished black SUVs waiting at valet. Deep breath, Jane, I whispered to myself. I wasn't here for them. I was here for Saxon. Inside, the maitre d' gave me a once-over that lasted a second too long, then gestured stiffly toward the banquet hall. My heels clicked against marble as I entered a room dripping with affluence, silk gowns, tailored tuxedos, sparkling jewelry. Heads turned, conversations dipped. I was a flicker of imperfection in their flawless canvas. At the center of it all stood Lorraine Morse Whitfield, my daughter's mother-in-law, draped in emerald silk, pearls cascading from her neck, her smile a weapon sharpened by years of practice. Beside her, Colonel Brissenden loomed in his tailored suit, glass of scotch in hand, radiating the self-importance of a man who believed the world itself bent to his will. And then, Martin, my son-in-law, polished as ever, tie knotted with military precision, standing at his mother's side like a well-trained soldier. His eyes met mine briefly, cool and unreadable, before sliding away. Jane? Lorraine said at last. Her voice sweetened with venom. How surprising. I forced a smile. Happy birthday, Lorraine. I offered the small gift bag. Inside, the silk scarf I'd spent far too much on. She accepted it with 2 fingers, as if it might soil her manicure. Fashion from Italy, I added softly. How quaint, she replied, already handing it to a waiting servant. The room shifted, 100 eyes cataloging the scene. My cheeks warmed, but I stood straighter. I would not shrink. Saxon appeared then, radiant in a midnight blue gown, her face lighting up when she saw me. She rushed forward, hugging me tightly. Mom, I'm so glad you're here. For a moment, everything else melted away. My daughter's embrace reminded me why I was enduring this humiliation. But the reprieve didn't last. Well? Colonel Brissenden's voice cut across the chatter. It seems we're ready to begin, except... His eyes swept over me like a searchlight finding its target. "Some of us don't seem quite prepared for the occasion." The words hung in the air, drawing smirks from a few nearby guests. "Father?" Martin murmured, but too softly to matter. Lorraine's lips curled. "Really, Jane? Did no one tell you this was formal? A nurse's uniform might have suited you better. At least then people would know their roles." Laughter, low, cruel, rippled through the room. My daughter stiffened beside me. "Mom looks fine," Saxon said sharply. Her voice trembled, but her loyalty shone. Lorraine tilted her head, faux sympathy dripping from every word. "Darling, you're too kind, but surely you don't expect your mother to sit among our guests dressed like—" She gestured vaguely at my navy dress. That. I felt the heat rise in my chest. For years, I'd endured their condescension in silence, for Saxon's sake. But this was different. This was public. This was deliberate. Colonel Brissenden raised his glass. "If one cannot dress like a civilized person," he announced, his voice booming across the hall, "then one should not sit at the table with civilized people." The room froze. Utter silence. Even the violins faltered. My daughter's face went pale. "Dad," she whispered to Martin, "say something." But Martin only adjusted his cufflinks, eyes avoiding mine. It wasn't just humiliation. It was erasure. In their eyes, I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. I wasn't even human. I opened my mouth to reply, but Saxon stepped forward, her voice breaking. "That's my mother." Lorraine's smile hardened. "Your mother should understand boundaries." A murmur spread among the guests. Some looked away, embarrassed to witness cruelty. Others watched hungrily, enjoying the spectacle. I stood there, a retired nurse, a widow, a woman who had sacrificed everything for the very daughter now trembling beside me. And these people, the so-called elite, were trying to strip me of dignity in front of everyone. For a moment, I wanted to flee, to take Saxon's hand and run from that poisonous room. But another part of me, stronger, older, sharpened by every hardship life had dealt me, rose up instead. I looked directly at Lorraine, then at the colonel. My voice, though quiet, carried through the room. "You're right. Some people don't understand boundaries. Some people think money makes them better than others. But I'll tell you something. Character isn't measured by the price of your clothes or the weight of your pearls. It's measured by what you do when no one's watching." Gasps. Silence. Lorraine's smile cracked. Colonel Brissenden's glass lowered, and Martin's hand shook as he set his wine down. Saxon squeezed my arm, pride flickering in her tearful eyes. I didn't know it then, but justice was already on its way, driving a silver Rolls-Royce toward the hotel, carrying the very man I had stopped to help on the highway. And when he walked through those glass doors, everything would change. The silence after my words still clung to the air when the hotel's heavy glass doors swung open. A hush rippled across the room, as if the evening itself had been interrupted. Every eye turned toward the entrance. A tall man in a tailored navy suit strode inside, silver hair catching the chandelier's glow. His presence was immediate, commanding, not from arrogance, but from the quiet authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and negotiations that moved millions. Humphrey Van Weyden. I recognized him instantly. Hours earlier, I had knelt beside his broken Rolls-Royce on the highway, sleeves rolled up, hands steady, as I reassured him while patching what I could until a tow arrived. He had introduced himself politely, but I hadn't grasped who he was then. Just another soul in need, and I had done what I'd always done: help. Now, he stood in the foyer of the Grand Oakland Hotel, scanning the room. His gaze landed on me, and his entire face transformed. Warmth lit his eyes, his expression breaking into a genuine smile. "Jane!" His voice carried easily across the marble hall, rich with recognition. "What a wonderful surprise!" I froze, my humiliation still raw. Guests whispered, eyebrows lifting. Lorraine's perfectly sculpted face faltered, as if a mask had slipped. Colonel Brissenden straightened, suddenly alert. Martin's wineglass trembled in his hand. Humphrey crossed the room quickly, ignoring the sea of astonished faces. He reached for my hand, clasping it firmly in both of his. "You made it after all," he said warmly. "I was hoping to see you again tonight." My lips parted, but no words came. Hours earlier, we had been strangers on the side of a highway. Now, in this glittering hall, he greeted me like an honored guest. "You know her?" Lorraine's voice cracked, brittle with disbelief. Humphrey turned to her, his expression shifting to polite neutrality. "Know her? This woman saved me today. My Rolls Royce gave out on the interstate. I'd have been stranded for hours if not for Jane. She spent nearly 2 hours making sure I was safe." The room erupted in murmurs. I felt every eye burning into me, but this time not with contempt. Something else. Curiosity. Recalculation. "She helped you?" Colonel Brissenden stammered. Humphrey's brow lifted. "Indeed. She refused to accept payment, even after using her own tools and supplies. Tell me." His eyes swept the crowd, voice calm but edged. "How many of you would do the same for a stranger?" The guests shifted uncomfortably, their jeweled bracelets and silk gowns suddenly weighty in the silence. No one answered. Lorraine recovered first, forcing a brittle laugh. "Well, that's quite admirable, I suppose. But you must understand, tonight is a very formal occasion. Appearances matter." "Appearances?" Humphrey repeated softly, his voice now dangerous in its calmness. "Do you mean the appearance of character? Or the appearance of clothing?" Lorraine faltered. "Well, both, naturally." Humphrey's gaze hardened. "Interesting, because just minutes ago, I walked into this hall and overheard something quite troubling. Something about who was, or was not, fit to sit with civilized people." The air thickened. Guests froze, unwilling to move under the weight of his words. Brissenden cleared his throat. "Surely you misunderstand." "I misunderstand nothing," Humphrey interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like steel. "I heard your words, and I watched your faces when you delivered them." He turned to the crowd, his eyes sharp. "I spend my life evaluating people, not just their financial statements, but their character. Because in the end, it is character that decides whether partnerships thrive or fail." I felt my chest tighten. The entire room hung on his every syllable. He gestured toward me. This woman, Jane Eden, spent her afternoon helping someone she had never met. She dirtied her hands, gave her time, and asked nothing in return. That is character. That is civilization. And yet, she was humiliated here tonight, not for any fault of her own, but because she does not parade wealth the way you do. Gasps. A few guests glanced toward Lorraine and Brissenden. Others bowed their heads in shame. Saxon gripped my arm, tears glistening in her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, relief and pride flooding her voice. Humphrey wasn't finished. He stepped closer to the Brissendens, his tone now razor sharp. "You invited me here tonight because you seek my investment in your expansion project. You paraded this evening as proof of your refinement, your worthiness, and yet, the moment you thought no one important was watching, you revealed who you really are. Lorraine's face drained of color. Brissenden's jaw worked, but no sound came. Humphrey let the silence stretch, his eyes never leaving theirs. So let me test this theory. If character truly doesn't matter, if only appearances do, then what does that say about your fitness to lead? About your ability to earn the trust of your partners? About your right to ask for millions of other people's money? The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock in the corner. Finally, Brissenden tried to rally. Mr. Van Wyden, with respect, business is business. Surely you wouldn't let a simple misunderstanding interfere with potential profit? Humphrey's laugh was cold, humorless. Profit? Without character, profit is poison. And what I've seen tonight tells me everything I need to know about your enterprise. The whispers swelled again, louder this time. Guests leaned toward one another, scandal spreading like wildfire. Lorraine tried desperately to smile. Please, Humphrey, you must understand. We didn't mean— You meant exactly what you said. Humphrey snapped, his composure cracking just enough to reveal the fury beneath. You told a woman who has given her life to helping others that she wasn't fit to sit with you. That alone tells me your priorities. And if that is how you treat family, how do you treat your partners, your employees, your clients? He looked back at me then, his gaze softening. Jane, I can assure you, you are far more civilized than anyone who would dare speak to you that way. My throat tightened, words refusing to come. For years, I had been diminished, erased in quiet corners. And now, in front of everyone, someone had finally seen me, defended me. Humphrey straightened, turning once more to the crowd. Consider this evening an investigation into character, and the results are clear. There is no place in my business or my life for hypocrisy dressed in silk. The room broke into murmurs, half in awe, half in dread. Lorraine's hand trembled on her wineglass. Brissenden's face turned ashen. Martin stood frozen, caught between his parents and his wife, his loyalty laid bare. And I, Jane Eden, widow, nurse, mother, stood taller than I had in years. This was only the beginning. The ballroom buzzed like a hive of restless bees after Humphrey's words. Guests leaned close, whispering sharp fragments. Did you hear what he said? She helped him on the highway? I can't believe Lorraine. Lorraine's face had stiffened into a brittle mask, but the tiny twitch at the corner of her eye betrayed her panic. Colonel Brissenden shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming against his glass. Martin adjusted his tie again and again, the gesture of a man cornered, searching for escape. Humphrey, calm as a man used to depositions and negotiations, let the silence build until every guest was desperate for resolution. Then, deliberately, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. I wasn't planning to bring this up tonight, he began, his voice carrying the clarity of judgment. But given the circumstances, transparency seems necessary. He pulled out a sleek leather folio, the kind executives carried like shields. From it, he withdrew a folded sheet of paper, creased from travel, but stamped with unmistakable official seals. He laid it gently on the table nearest him, where candles glowed in polished silver holders. This, he said, is the preliminary report from my firm's due diligence team regarding Brissenden developments. Gasps flickered around the room. Colonel Brissenden's face flushed. That's completely unnecessary, he stammered. Humphrey ignored him. Ordinarily, these reports remain confidential until final decisions are made. But character? His gaze swept the room, then return to the Colonel. Character compels me to disclose when honesty has been compromised. He tapped the paper once. We already noted irregularities in your expansion project. Inflated projections. Land parcels valued at double their actual worth. Promises to investors without permits approved. Murmurs grew louder, scandal thickening the air. Lorraine tried to laugh, though it cracked. Surely there's some mistake. Our lawyers? Your lawyers can't erase numbers, Humphrey interrupted smoothly. And numbers, unlike smiles, don't lie. My breath caught. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about me. Humphrey hadn't simply come to a birthday dinner as a polite guest. He'd come prepared, watching, testing, and now revealing truths that reached far beyond a petty insult. Still, he wasn't done. Of course, he continued, his tone light as if discussing the weather. Due diligence isn't just financial. We speak with people, employees, partners, sometimes even family. Every eye in the room turned toward me. My pulse quickened. For years, I had endured quietly. But now, Humphrey was offering me a stage, a chance to speak where silence had always been demanded. I straightened, voice steady though my heart thundered. I've been treated as invisible in this family for years. At dinners, Ruth corrected my speech. Colonel dismissed my questions. Martin rolled his eyes at my opinions. But that wasn't enough. Tonight, you all heard it. I was told I wasn't fit to sit with civilized people. In front of my daughter. In front of you all. Gasps. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some nodding subtly as if confirming what they had witnessed. A woman in a sequined gown spoke up from the corner. I heard it too. She was standing right next to me. They said it. Another voice. I did as well. The chorus built, one affirmation after another, until it was undeniable. The humiliation that had been designed to isolate me was now becoming evidence, witnessed, catalogued, remembered. Lorraine's mask cracked. This is absurd, she snapped. We were joking. Anyone can misinterpret tone. Tone? Humphrey's eyebrow rose. Tell me, Lorraine, what tone should one use to strip dignity from a woman who sacrificed her life for her daughter? What tone justifies erasing decades of service and sacrifice with one cruel sentence? Lorraine's lips parted, but no words came. Humphrey gestured toward me. Tell them, Jane. What do they need to understand about you? For a moment, I hesitated. Years of being told to stay quiet clung like chains. But then Saxon's hand slipped into mine, her grip firm, her eyes pleading. Say it, Mom. I drew a breath. I was a nurse for 40 years. I worked double shifts, holidays, nights. I fed patients who couldn't feed themselves, held the hands of the dying, calmed children who woke screaming from nightmares. My husband, David, fell while hiking. He lived 3 years in a hospital bed before his body gave out. And I stayed. I cared for him every single day until the end. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to continue. I sold what I could to pay medical bills. I gave what remained to Saxon and Martin for their wedding, for their house. I sacrificed without complaint, and tonight I was told that none of that mattered, that I didn't deserve a seat at the table. A heavy silence fell. Then a guest near the front, an older man with a cane, spoke. You deserve more than a seat. You deserve respect. The room murmured in agreement. Humphrey inclined his head. Exactly, respect. That's the true currency of civilization. He turned back to Brissenden, voice hardening. And you've squandered it. Not just tonight, but in every lie, every inflated promise, Every time you looked at people like Jane and thought them lesser. This room has become your courtroom, and the verdict is clear. Lorraine tried to rally. You can't possibly. But Humphrey cut her off with a single word. Enough. The command cracked through the room like a whip. Even the violinists had stopped pretending to play. He gathered the folio back into his jacket, his expression unreadable now. My decision is made, but tonight isn't about business. It's about truth. And the truth is, Jane Eden has shown more integrity in an afternoon than this household has shown in years. Gasps again. All around, heads nodded. Guests leaned toward me, some offering small smiles of solidarity. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a burden, not as a widow, but as a woman who had endured, given, and survived. And in the center of the Grand Oakland Hotel, the glittering fortress of wealth and pride, it was the Brissendens, not me, who stood stripped bare. The night at the Grand Oakland Hotel ended in chaos, though on the surface everyone pretended to continue as if nothing had happened. Guests forced conversations, forks scraped across china, and violinists played softer, as though they too understood the tension. But the damage had been done. Humphrey sat beside me through the rest of the dinner, calm and unreadable, while Lorraine tried to smile through clenched teeth. The colonel barely touched his food. Martin avoided looking at me at all. When I left, Saxon hugged me tightly, whispering that she was proud of me. I walked into the night air lighter than I had in years, though I knew the battle wasn't over. Humphrey caught my hand before I could leave, pressing a small folded note into my palm. Tomorrow, noon, my office. The following day, I sat across from him in an office that looked out over the bay, sunlight spilling across polished wood and shelves lined with awards. For a moment, I wondered how I, a widow with little more than a modest pension, had found myself here. But then Humphrey began to speak, and I realized he saw me as an equal, not an intruder. He laid out what his team had already uncovered. Brissenden Developments was a house of cards, inflated valuations, incomplete permits, promises made to investors without foundation, numbers that did not hold. They survive on reputation, Humphrey said evenly. Without it, they collapse. Last night revealed their character. Now we connect the character to the numbers. That's how you cut them down for good. I listened in silence, my fingers tracing the edge of the file he slid across the desk. Inside were documents, preliminary reports, enough to make my head swim. But what can I do? I asked quietly. Humphrey stopped me with a firm shake of his head. You are not just anything. You are the key. They humiliated you in front of witnesses. People heard it. Some even recorded it. If you speak first, others will follow. You put your name to the truth, and the wall of silence crumbles. For years, I had swallowed insults, endured dismissals, told myself it didn't matter as long as Saxon was happy. But now, remembering Lorraine's voice echoing across the ballroom, don't sit at the table with civilized people? I knew I couldn't stay quiet. My hands trembled as I nodded. I'll do it. The days that followed felt like preparing for a war I'd never planned to fight. Humphrey's assistants worked with me on my statement. 3 pages became 5, every word describing what had been said, not just that night, but over years of gatherings. The patronizing comments, the corrections, the constant reminder that in their world, I didn't belong. Writing it felt like opening old wounds, but when I finished, I realized something. Those wounds were already there. Speaking them didn't make me weaker, it made me stronger. One by one, witnesses began to add their voices. A woman in a sequined gown confirmed what she had heard. Another guest admitted she had filmed Lorraine's words, laughing at the time but horrified when she realized what she had captured. When Humphrey showed me the shaky clip, Lorraine's voice rang clear through the speakers. "If you can't dress like a civilized woman, then don't sit with civilized people." The cruelty was undeniable. Meanwhile, Humphrey's team finalized their due diligence report. Every inflated figure, every suspicious loan guarantee, every inconsistency was laid bare in crisp black print. "They will try to claim misunderstanding," Humphrey said, "but numbers don't lie. And paired with this," he tapped my testimony, "their excuses collapse." We decided to move quietly but decisively. On Monday morning, his firm would circulate the financial report to all current and potential investors in Brissenden Developments. Attached to it would be a sealed statement, multiple accounts of the incident at the Grand Oakland Hotel, signed and corroborated. Investors would see not only shaky numbers, but rotten character. Reputation would unravel faster than any spreadsheet. The night before the release, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my small living room, David's photograph watching me from the mantel. I told him what I was about to do. "I never wanted revenge," I whispered. "All I ever wanted was respect. For Saxon. For you. For me." The house was quiet, but in my chest there was a steady beat of certainty. This was no longer just about me. It was about drawing a line they could never cross again. On Monday, the first cracks appeared. By noon, whispers raced through investor circles. By evening, headlines spread across financial journals. Concerns over Brissenden expansion project. By Tuesday, the story had broken into mainstream press, no longer just about numbers, but about scandal. They used the word humiliation. They printed Lorraine's quote. "They called me a retired nurse who spoke truth to wealth." By Wednesday morning, I opened the paper to see bold letters screaming, "Investor withdraws, Brissenden deal collapses after character scandal." Lorraine released a polished statement calling it a misunderstanding taken out of context. The colonel insisted figures had been misinterpreted. Martin said nothing, his silence louder than denial. But it didn't matter. The video clip spread. The testimonies stacked. Humphrey's report sealed it. Their empire, built on arrogance and illusions, was crumbling. Through it all, Humphrey stood steady, never claiming victory for himself, always reminding me this was my stand as much as his. "Justice isn't about revenge," he said one evening as we watched the bay lights glitter. "It's about truth. And now, the truth is undeniable." For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful, not because I had destroyed someone else, but because I had finally defended myself. The Brissendens thought they could humiliate me into silence. Instead, they gave me a voice. And with Humphrey's help, that voice had reached further than I ever imagined. By the end of the week, there was no containing the fire. What had begun as whispers among investors spread like gasoline across every channel of Oakland society. Newspapers carried headlines that made the Brissenden name sound toxic. Online forums replayed the shaky video clip again and again, Lorraine's sharp voice echoing for millions to hear. "If you can't dress like a civilized woman, then don't sit with civilized people." Reporters camped outside their estate gates, microphones extended like spears. Investors backed away one by one, each issuing careful statements about reevaluating commitments. Within days, the expansion project they had staked everything on was dead in the water. And still, Humphrey advised patience. "Let them bury themselves," he told me quietly. "The worst damage is always self-inflicted. He was right. The Brissendens tried denial at first, press releases calling it a joke, a misunderstanding, but every denial only invited more scrutiny. Former employees began to speak out, describing a culture of disdain and exploitation. One woman recounted how Lorraine had once told her to use the servants' entrance. It's more appropriate. Another spoke of Colonel Brissenden berating staff in public meetings. The cracks widened until their carefully polished facade shattered. The final blow came during a press conference they hastily arranged at the Grand Oakland Hotel. The same place they had humiliated me. Cameras flashed as Lorraine, dressed in somber black, attempted a speech about misrepresentation. Her voice trembled, uncharacteristically uncertain. Behind her, the colonel's jaw tightened with every question hurled by reporters. Did you inflate land valuations? Did you mislead investors? Do you deny the video's authenticity? And then, from the back of the room, a voice rose, clear and sharp. Do you regret calling Jane Eden unfit to sit with civilized people? The silence was thunderous. Lorraine froze. Cameras pivoted. Microphones thrust forward. My name, on every journalist's lips. For a long, agonizing moment, Lorraine stood there, caught between pride and survival. Her lips parted, closed, opened again. Finally, she forced out a brittle smile. I regret that my words were taken out of context. The room exploded in chaos. Shouts of protest, cameras flashing, reporters demanding clarity. But it was too late. Her non-apology sealed their fate. That evening, news channels replayed the clip of her answer alongside the original video. Anchors dissected every syllable. Commentators debated the meaning of context. And the public decided for themselves. There was no context that excused cruelty. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from strangers poured in. Nurses, widows, mothers, ordinary people who had endured years of being dismissed. Thank you for standing up. You gave me courage. You reminded me that dignity matters. I sat in my modest kitchen, the same one where David and I had once shared coffee, watching the world finally acknowledge what I had known all along. That worth isn't measured in pearls or property, but in character. The Brissendens disappeared from public view within weeks. Their project collapsed, investors demanded repayment, and whispers of lawsuits circled like vultures. Social invitations dried up, their once crowded parties reduced to empty halls. The empire of appearances they had built so carefully lay in ruins. And me? I didn't celebrate. Not loudly. The satisfaction wasn't in their downfall. It was in my survival, my dignity reclaimed. The same people who had once looked through me at gatherings now saw me clearly. I was no longer invisible. The night the final headline broke. Brissenden dynasty falls after scandal. Humphrey took me to a quiet restaurant by the bay. No chandeliers, no marble, just wood tables and warm lighting. Over simple plates of grilled fish and vegetables, he raised his glass. To character, he said softly. The only thing that endures. I lifted mine, meeting his gaze. For the first time in years, I felt not just vindicated, but hopeful. Perhaps life after David could still hold connection, respect, even companionship. The Brissendens had thought they could erase me with a single cruel sentence. Instead, they erased themselves. And in the ruins of their empire, I found something they could never buy back. The unshakable knowledge that I was worthy. Always had been. When the dust settled, the Brissendens were unrecognizable shadows of their former selves. Their empire, once bolstered by glittering reputations and polished connections, had been reduced to rubble. Colonel Brissenden faced the harshest blow. Investors filed lawsuits, accusing him of misrepresentation and fraud. Meetings that once welcomed him with deference now closed their doors. I saw his photo in the paper weeks later. The proud shoulders slumped, the jaw that once barked orders now sagging under the weight of disgrace. Lorraine fared no better. Her name became shorthand for arrogance in the local press. Every charity committee, every social board she once ruled abandoned her. Invitations vanished. Friends disappeared, and the pearls she had flaunted at the hotel seemed only to strangle what little credibility she had left. The woman who once sneered at me for being uncivilized now found herself ostracized from the very circles she worshipped. And Martin, my son-in-law, Saxon's husband, stood in the wreckage, silent and broken. His career, built on his family's name, withered overnight. Colleagues no longer trusted him. Every boardroom saw not competence, but the scandal etched across his last name. At home, Saxon confided to me in quiet tears. He barely speaks anymore. He knows this is the end of everything he thought he was. As for Saxon, she was torn but unbroken. She admitted that watching her husband's family unravel was painful, but she also told me something that made my heart ache with pride. "Mom, I finally see what you meant about dignity, about character. I should have defended you sooner." For the first time in years, I felt my daughter fully on my side, not divided, not apologizing for them, but standing with me. The wider circle of guests who had witnessed that night also paid their own subtle price. Many issued quiet apologies to me, some even in writing. Their words could not erase the silence of that evening, but I accepted them for what they were, acknowledgments that I had been wronged. And me? I didn't need wealth or revenge or the satisfaction of watching them crumble. The true consequence was freedom. I no longer felt like a ghost at family gatherings, no longer shrank under condescending glances. I had faced their cruelty and survived it, and in the end, the world had seen them for who they truly were. Humphrey visited often. We spoke about business, about life, about the strange ways fate can twist a single afternoon into a turning point. Sometimes, he told me, justice takes years, but when it comes swiftly. The Brissendens had lost everything they thought mattered, and I, Jane Eden, widow, nurse, mother, had gained the only thing that ever truly mattered, my dignity, restored and unshakable. In the quiet that followed the storm, I found myself walking along the bay one evening, the wind cool against my face. For years, I had carried the weight of silence, shrinking so my daughter could belong in a world that never wanted me. But now, that silence was broken forever. The Brissendens had lost their empire, but I had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that no one could erase my worth. David's memory lived in every act of kindness I gave, and now Humphrey reminded me that there were still people in the world who saw dignity as greater than wealth. Where this new path leads, I don't yet know. Perhaps it will be friendship, perhaps something more. What I do know is this: I will never again allow anyone to tell me I am less. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching this will remember that true civilization isn't written in pearls or marble, but in the way we treat each other when we think no one is watching. If you found my story moving, please subscribe to this channel and share it with others. Your support helps bring more stories of truth and resilience to light.